welcome to another episode of What's Cooking? Okay. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of What's Cooking? Today we're going to read Miss Fiona's stupendous pumpkin pies. What do you think the word stupendous means? Do you have any ideas? If you said wonderful or fantastic or super, you'd be right. So it's Miss Fiona's super pumpkin pies. This must be Miss Fiona, right? I think so. Let's read more about her and her famous, delicious pumpkin pies. Just in time for fall and just in time for Halloween, I thought this would be a fun story to share. Down past the spooky graveyard and across the stubbled fields, there lies a big old haunted house where all the paint has peeled. The shutters on the windows hang crooked, if at all. The roof is in such bad repair, it looks like it might fall. There's a stone wall in the side yard and a crooked picket fence, and an old barn sits behind the house that isn't worth 2 cents. So she lives in this old kind of beat down house, right, that's sort of falling apart. So of course it looks kind of spooky, and people say that it's haunted. I wonder if it's really haunted, though. In the garden, there's a scarecrow with his stuffing falling out, and everywhere you look, you see stray cats lying about. This house appears deserted, but it's still occupied, although some believe its occupants can disappear and fly. An occupant is someone who lives in a house, right, who lives in the building. So they're saying the house is occupied and they think the occupant can disappear and fly. Well, who could disappear and fly other than a witch or a ghost? The old woman, Miss Fiona, lives here with all her cats. A horse and a cow live in the barn, along with several bats. Now, legend says Fiona is 400 years and 3, though she never looked much older than 200 years to me. She walks a bit stooped over and wears a long black dress, and underneath her pointed hat, her hair's a stringy mess. One eye is larger than the other, there's a big old wart on her nose, and on her feet are bright red shoes with doodads on the toes. Check out her fancy shoes. Those are her doodads. And her long black dress has what shape on it? Stars, that's right. And another clue that she indeed is a witch would be the long broom that she's holding, right? Some folks think she's kooky, dressed like a witch on Halloween, but that just proves appearances aren't always what they seem. For she keeps a tidy garden with a good-sized pumpkin patch, and every Halloween she serves fresh pumpkin pie from scratch. That means she makes them homemade. She doesn't buy them at the store. Sometime in late October, Miss Fiona starts her yield and brings in all her pumpkins from her big old pumpkin field. She has a lot of them, doesn't she? Wonder how many we would count if we counted all those jack-o'-lanterns and all those pumpkins in her yard. Now, boys and girls, think about when you go trick-or-treating and what typical treats you get when you knock on the door, right? You knock on the door, you say trick-or-treat, and they usually drop a bag of candy or a candy bar in your bag. But not when you go to Miss Fiona's house. They're saying that she serves homemade pumpkin pie to all the trick-or-treaters. Can you believe it? That's a lot of pies she would have to make. Pumpkins line her windowsills and pumpkins line her floor. She has so many pumpkins, some come rolling out the door. She keeps pumpkins in her attic and some in her woodshed. There's even some who'll tell you she keeps pumpkins in her bed. Then on the day of Halloween, and not one day before, Fiona gathers all her pumpkins and begins her yearly chore. So the day before Halloween is when she sets out to work in the kitchen. She hangs a cauldron on the fire to bubble and to boil. She chops and peels and rolls and stirs in a frenzied baking toil. Now and then she'll cackle as she checks her recipe, and then she'll peek over her shoulder to make sure no one sees. For her ingredients are a secret. But as she sets each pie to cool, the spicy scent that fills the air makes everybody drool. No matter how you beg and plead, Fiona holds her ground. Not one piece of pie is served until midnight rolls around. So she serves it at midnight. Look at all those trick-or-treaters looking in the window, just waiting for the tasty pumpkin pie. And they can smell it wafting through the air. What does pumpkin pie smell like? You'll find out a little bit later on when you get to try out our pumpkin pie recipe. Pumpkin doesn't really so much have a smell, but the cloves and the ginger that you use in a pumpkin pie recipe sure does. Cinnamon. As angels, spooks, and goblins start to gather on the street, the night is filled with laughter and the cries of "Trick or treat!" Black cats and ballerinas run to each house and in between, wishing every witch and every ghost a happy Halloween. But the last house that we visit, as the midnight hour draws nigh, is part of the spooky graveyard for a slice of pumpkin pie. Boys and girls for miles around come knocking at her door, dressed in such frightful costumes as vampires and dinosaurs. Miss Fiona shrieks and giggles as she welcomes each new guest, and then sends them to the backyard to wait for all the rest. As the witching hour creeps closer, Fiona steps out onto her porch, with a crow upon her shoulder and a hand a burning torch. She surveys all of her visitors, and we wave and smile to greet her. Then she slowly lets her spooky gaze fall on one special trick-or-treater. She points and crooks her finger and wiggles her eyebrows and then cackles. "Ha ha ha ha! Come, my dearie, I need your help inside my house." This year it's a pink rabbit that is Miss Fiona's choice. We all look at her with envy, all the little girls and boys. For it's quite the supreme honor to help Fiona serve her pies. A most distinguished, rare accomplishment to be so recognized. So she might cackle and use her spooky witch voice, but I don't think Miss Fiona is spooky at all. Do you? No, I think she's just dressed up in costume. I think she's quite a nice lady that's very, very kind and generous to be dishing out all these pumpkin pies. And so this year she picks a pink rabbit, but every year it's somebody different. And the chosen child gets to go in her house and help her serve the pies to everyone else. The seconds tick by slowly. The anticipation grows. The moon peeks out behind the clouds and the wind begins to blow. Then far off in the distance, the church bells begin to peal, and from inside her kitchen, we hear Miss Fiona squeal. "Oh, come all you witches, come clowns and pirates too. Come celebrate this Halloween and bring your friends with you." She wants them all to come. She's inviting many visitors. And with that, Fiona's helper throws the front door open wide and beckons every girl and boy to come and step inside. The house is warm and cozy with carved pumpkins everywhere, though you do have to be careful not to get cobwebs in your hair. Owls hoot in the pantry, cats lie at Fiona's feet. From upstairs we hear wails and moans that make Halloween complete. The pies are most delicious, and she also serves warm cider. Then she passes out souvenir rings in the shape of creepy spiders. And after every one of us has had cider and has been fed, she tells us spooky stories that make our eyes pop out of our head. So not only does she invite them in for a delicious slice of pumpkin pie, but then they're allowed to stay for like a special story time. And Miss Fiona tells spooky stories on Halloween night. As we leave, she sends us home with an extra slice of pie for Mom and Dad and Grandma, who wait up until we arrive. Most folks are very curious about Fiona and her ways, but mostly it's her pumpkin pies that we talk about for days. I must admit, Fiona's kooky with her warts and pale green skin, but who cares how kooky someone looks when there's goodness deep within? Still, I scratch my head and wonder when folks ask the secret to her pie, 'cause she'll wink and snort and cackle to everyone's surprise. Just take one big plump ripe pumpkin, add a lizard and a toad, stir in a few good bat wings, and serve it a la mode. A la mode means with a scoop of ice cream on top. But do you think she really puts in lizards and toads and bat wings? I hope not, and I think she's just kidding. So whether she's a real witch or whether she's just dressed up, we know that she's a good witch. She's a nice witch. She's friendly, and she feeds the neighborhood. Doesn't that look delicious? The pumpkin pie with the ice cream on top and 2 cherries to boot. Yeah. Have you ever tasted pumpkin pie, boys and girls? Do you like the way pumpkin pie tastes? It definitely has a certain texture. It's smooth, but I think it's delicious. And on today's show, for What's Cooking, we're going to learn how to make our very own pumpkin pie. Hopefully it'll be stupendous, just like Miss Fiona's. Now, the recipe that we'll talk about on today's show can be found on our Fall Into Fun page if you want to print it off. And we also include some table talkers. So you talk more about pumpkins and where you might have seen pumpkins and maybe where you pick your pumpkins for Halloween, how you like to carve your pumpkins. Do you ever toast your pumpkin seeds? I like to do that. And did you know they're very, not only delicious, but they're very healthy for us, those pumpkin seeds. They have a lot of iron. I never knew that. And what else can we talk about pumpkins? How else can you eat a pumpkin besides pumpkin pie and besides toasting the seeds? That's something to think about. And so you can try even more recipes after you try out the pie. All right, everyone. I'll be back in just a second to teach you how to make some stupendous pumpkin pie. All right, everyone. I know I'm super excited to get started. I hope that you are too. The first step in making our pumpkin pies is to take your pie pan, and it should be ungreased, which means you don't have to spray it or rub a stick of butter on it. They want it to be ungreased. And for us to take our pie shell and kind of just gently press it into that pie pan. Now, it's also important to note that you can make your own homemade pie crust, and there's recipes online, and it's simple to do. For the sake of time, I bought a pie shell at the grocery store. Usually comes in a 2-pack. Of course, you're only using 1 today. You also could use a pre-made graham cracker crust, and your pumpkin pie would turn out delicious. And I also want to mention that you can make a crustless pumpkin pie. My mom often does that. And again, it's still delicious and tasty. You just don't have the crust. Okay, I'm going to use my pre-made pie shell, and I'm going to gently press it into my pie pan. These are sometimes fragile, right? You don't want to poke a hole in it or tear the crust. So when I say gently, I really do mean maybe just a couple fingertips pressing it down in there. Okay, once you have your pumpkin shell out, which should be room temperature, you can go ahead and set that aside. So pie shells usually have to be refrigerated unless it's the graham cracker crust. And so when I say room temperature, you want to take it out of the fridge, maybe let it sit on the counter for 20 minutes before you put it into your pie pan. All right, let's set that aside and let's get started. Now, you're in your kitchen. I'm in a makeshift kitchen here in the BPTV studios. So I'm going to make do with what I have. And there are a few things that I already realized I forgot. But you're in your kitchen, so I'm going to tell you to grab 2 bowls. You'll need a bowl to mix the dry ingredients in, and then a bowl for your wet ingredients. Now, our first ingredient is 2 eggs. So I'm going to crack my eggs into the bigger bowl that I'm going to use for my wet ingredients. Now, cracking an egg can be tricky, and I don't know that there's really any right or wrong way or any tips that I can share with you. It just takes a lot of practice. And sometimes I still even break shells into the bowl, in which case you just want to carefully scoop them out with a spoon, or sometimes I take a little piece of paper towel and I kind of get it out with the paper towel. Let's see if I can crack these 2 eggs without any shells going in. I tap it just on the side of the bowl or on the table or counter. And then you pull straight apart. I did it. That is one tip. Instead of like going down, or you wouldn't crack up, right? You want to tap it to crack it and then pull it straight apart. And that usually works perfectly. Usually. Egg number 2. Crack and pull straight apart. All right, I'm going to set my eggshells aside to get those out of the way. And I'm going to beat my eggs. So you beat eggs with a kitchen utensil or a kitchen tool called a whisk, right? And you just want to beat those for about a minute or so. If you have an electric mixer that you want to plug in and use to beat this all together, you certainly can. I just thought my whisk would work just as well for today. Once you think those eggs are beat well enough, which I think mine are, now you can go ahead and add some of your other ingredients. Now, I also want to mention that most of the stories I choose for what's cooking have that recipe in the back. Miss Fiona's Stupendous Pumpkin Pies does not include a recipe. So our recipe today is coming directly from the back of a Libby's pumpkin can. I find that that's the recipe that a lot of people use. It's the one that I use every Thanksgiving and the one that I find to be most delicious. So it's printed on our website again for you, but if you want to just look up a recipe, Google it. I always use the Libby's recipe. Or if you buy the Libby brand pumpkin, you can just look at the back of the can. So checking our recipe page here, it says to mix the cinnamon, sugar, salt, ginger, and cloves separately. Those are your dry ingredients. And I don't have a smaller bowl to do that today, but I already have my sugar measured out, 3/4 of a cup. So I'm just going to put my other ingredients in this measuring cup, and I'll try to mix it very carefully. 3/4 cup sugar, plus a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. Cinnamon is one of the things that makes it smell so delicious. This is my teaspoon. I have it marked to a 1/2 mark. And when you're using, spices and things, there's usually 2 sides, right? You can sprinkle it out through the 3 holes. Or if you're calling for a lot, you can scoop it out on this side. So we're going to go ahead and just use the bigger side. Sometimes I take the cap all the way off too, which I might do today, and scoop it out that way. I want to make sure I have exactly a 1/2 teaspoon, so I level it off with my finger. Okay, a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon going into my sugar. There it is. Next, it calls for a 1/2 teaspoon of ground ginger. Here's some ground ginger. I don't have to change it. It's also a 1/2 teaspoon, so it's already marked. Level it off. Dump it in. Then the recipe calls for 1/4 of a teaspoon of ground cloves. So on my handy dandy teaspoon measurer here, I'm going to move it up a notch so that it's only 1/4 of a teaspoon. Do you see how that got smaller? I can go 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, or a full teaspoon. Let's push it back up to 1/4. Now some teaspoons, it just, are separate. You might have the ones that are separate. This one kind of has the 4-in-1. Okay, so there's 1/4 of a teaspoon of ground cloves, also going into our sugar. They also tell you to add in, how much salt? A 1/2 teaspoon of salt. That's one of the things that I forgot and that we don't even have here at the library. I didn't bring it from home. So you make sure that you add your salt. I'm going to pretend that my salt is in here. And before I bake this pie, boys and girls, I'll of course make sure I add some salt. You wouldn't think just a 1/2 teaspoon, like that amount, would make much of a difference, but oftentimes it does, especially when you're baking. I feel like there's a little more room for flexibility when you're cooking a dish, but when you're baking a recipe, you have to follow the recipe pretty precisely. It does make a difference. Okay, so this worked as a mixing bowl, right? I just have to do it a little carefully. I'm mixing all those spices in with my sugar. And once I have that blended, I can then dump this into my bigger bowl that has the eggs. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Then of course I'll want to blend those, so I'll give that a good mix. Again, either with an electric mixer or by spoon. But if you're using a spoon, you really have to make sure you mix it well. And that could mean maybe even 100 stirs if you're counting. And you're going to work those muscles and you're going to go round and round. If your arm starts to hurt, you can switch, but you got to keep stirring. We want to make sure all those ingredients blend well together. And once you feel those are blended, then of course we can add our pumpkin. Now I already opened the can of pumpkin just to save time, but it is a 15-ounce can of pumpkin. Okay, you can buy the big fat can or you can buy the smaller can. This recipe is the small can of pumpkin. Make sure it says 15 ounces. You want to make sure you scrape it and get it all out. Pumpkin is the main ingredient, so you don't want to leave any in there, right? And then, of course, mix that in. So again, you're stirring in that big bowl, using those muscles, going round and round. This part is fun. I mean, yes, it does take some muscle work, but I think it's fun. I like to see it all mixed together. Okay, and then there's one more ingredient that you have to add, and that's evaporated milk. 1 can. Again, it should be regular size, it's 12 ounces. So if you want to check the label, you're looking to make sure it says 12 ounces. And I poured this in, and it says to pour in slowly so you can do a little bit of a time. I opened this again before the show just to save time. And it wasn't quite, I have a little bit more in the can there that I would want to add before I bake. When you're doing it, especially if mom or dad is helping you, or grandma or another grown-up, they can maybe pour it in gradually as you continue to stir. It can be teamwork. Okay, but it does say to add that milk slowly, gradually. Okay, once it's all in there, you're going to stir that up. Now, my friends, you have to be really careful. Well, if you're using this size bowl especially, because if you start to stir too much, too hard, too vigorously, you're going to have pumpkin mixture splashed everywhere. So now you'll see that I'm still stirring thoroughly, but I'm going slower. I'm being a little more gentle because I don't want to start to splash. This might be a fun part to kind of like sing or hum a tune while you stir. What Halloween songs could you sing while you mix? Once you have that all stirred, the final step is to pour it into that pie shell, and you're going to pour it in carefully. Make sure. Oh, and because I still have to add my salt, right, and a little bit more of the evaporated milk, I'm actually not going to pour it in. But I would pour it into my pie shell, and then I would bake it in the oven. Our recipe says to bake it at 425 degrees for 15 minutes. And then reduce that heat to 350, where it'll bake the rest of the way. And I did this last night. I made a sample pie that we can zoom in on here now. And that took about 45 minutes. Do you know how to test whether or not it's done? You can insert a knife to see if it comes out clean. If you put a knife in the middle of the pie and it comes out clean, you know your pie is done. But if you put a knife in the middle of the pie and it comes out with still pie on it, then it probably means it means that it needs to bake a little bit longer. That happened to me last night. I checked it twice and I put it back in for 5 minutes. So you'll know just by testing it, okay? But that's how you make a pumpkin pie. Not too many ingredients, right? That was pretty simple. Mix it all together, pour it into a pie shell, bake, and then enjoy. Now, let me just show you the pie that I am referring to that I made yesterday. It did get a little burnt around the edges, So you'll want to be careful of that. Maybe check more often than I did. I sort of got sidetracked. I was reading a good book. But it looks delicious and it tastes delicious. I think it's going to be just fine. I'm actually going to have my friends here at the BPTV studios try it out. And if boys and girls, you make this recipe at home and you get to try it out, I want to hear what you thought. So send me what you thought. Send me maybe new pumpkin recipes that you know of, because I would love to hear from you as well. So my email address is volpe@einetwork.net. We'll run that there at the bottom of the screen. I would love to hear from you. I would love to see pictures of you guys cooking in the kitchen. And I hope you enjoyed today's episode. We'll be back again next week with a brand new recipe to share and try together. Take care, everybody.